Hi, I'm Milas. My father once told people I was just playing hero, that I'd never last outside the FBI field, that I'd crumble. But you know what's worse than a father's doubt? A family that would rather see you small than see you free. They called me a failure. They whispered that I was nothing. Then the day came when my brother's boss stood, turned to me, and saluted, said, "Director of the FBI, it's an honor." And in that moment, my father's jaw didn't just drop, it shattered. You ever wonder what it costs to stand up, even when it means standing alone? Let me know where you're watching from tonight, and stay, because you're about to see how I made them see me. I drove down Cedar Lane, the kind of road where the trees lean over like they're trying to hide you from the sky. My old Civic rattled a bit when I turned onto my parents' street, the same stretch of cracked pavement I used to race my brother on with bikes we outgrew too fast. I slowed in front of the house with the dark green shutters, the flag out front, the small porch light already on, even though the sun was barely setting. I sat there for a second, engine humming beneath me, thumb tracing the edge of the bracelet on my wrist. My mother gave it to me when I turned 18, said, "No matter how far you go, you're still ours." Funny how a promise like that can turn into a reminder that you never quite belonged anywhere. I pulled the key, took a breath, and stepped out. The walk up to the door felt longer than it should have, gravel crunching under my boots, the smell of cut grass and salt air from the bay clinging to the breeze. Before I knocked, my father's voice slipped into my mind like a ghost. "Let her play hero. Just don't count on her." Mom opened the door before I could knock, her smile quick and warm. She hugged me lightly, smelled like vanilla lotion and the faint powder she's used since I was a kid. "You made it, honey," she said, but her eyes darted past me to the driveway, looking for someone else who wasn't coming. Inside, the house looked the same. Family photos lining the hall, the framed flag from my grandfather's funeral, the faint scent of roasted chicken mixing with laundry detergent. She led me to the dining room, and I saw the table already set, extra chairs pulled around, the good plates with the thin blue rims. She motioned me to a seat near the kitchen door, far enough from the head of the table that I felt like a guest in a place that once felt like home. Harlan was there, standing near Dad, his uniform pressed so sharply it looked like it could cut glass. They both laughed at something I couldn't hear, and I caught Dad's eye for a moment before he turned back to my brother, clapping him on the shoulder. The kind of gesture that says everything without needing words. I sat, trying to fold my hands in my lap without fidgeting, eyes drifting to the mantel above the fireplace. A new photo was there, the family lined up at Harlan's last event, everyone smiling. I looked closer, leaning just enough to see, and there it was, my face, cropped out, like I'd stepped away at the last second, erased clean. Mom called everyone to sit, and the chairs scraped against the hardwood. Harlan took the seat beside Dad, who cleared his throat before slicing into the roast, saying a quick blessing out of habit more than faith. The conversation rolled easily, laughter here and there, mostly about Harlan's new role with Naval Intelligence, about how he's making us proud, and how he's exactly what this family needed to continue the tradition. I kept my smile in place, nodding when Mom glanced at me, chewing slowly so I wouldn't have to talk. Dad didn't look at me much, but when he did, it was with that small lift of his eyebrow, the one that always asked, "And what have you done that's worth mentioning?" The talk turned to work, and Dad chuckled, saying, "We all know the real service happens out there in the field. Sitting behind screens can't teach you what the real world does." He lifted his glass, glancing at Harlan. "Here's to the real hero in this family." There was a small ripple of laughter, nothing mean, just enough to sting, the kind of laugh that tells you you're the only one not in on the joke. I felt my cheeks warm, my fingers tightening around my water glass until I thought it might crack. I swallowed it down, the words I wanted to say, the stories I could have told, stories about nights alone in dark rooms, tracing signals that could end lives or save them, about decisions I made that kept people breathing, people who would never know my name. But I stayed quiet like I always had, because if I spoke, if I told them everything, I knew exactly what Dad would say. That's not the same as being there, that's not real. Dinner went on, plates passed around, the hum of the conversation moving past me like a current I couldn't catch. I kept my eyes on the bracelet, the way the metal caught the light whenever I moved, a small reminder that I didn't need them to see me to know who I was. When dessert was served, I helped clear the dishes, moving between the table and the kitchen, feeling like a shadow drifting through the house. Mom gave me a soft smile, but her eyes flicked away quickly, back to Dad, to Harlan, to the story they wanted to tell. As the evening wound down, I stepped into the hallway, looking into the darkened window, seeing my reflection looking back. The bracelet glinted in the low light, and I took a breath, pressing my hand against the glass, letting the coolness ground me. You will see me. But the only person looking back at me that night was me. That morning, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, fastening the simple dark blue blazer over my black blouse. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun, the way I used to before field ops, letting the clean lines of it remind me that I was still someone worth showing up for, even if no one else noticed. I skipped the makeup, not out of neglect, but because I didn't want to paint on a face that wasn't mine. The bracelet slipped under my sleeve as I adjusted the cuffs, the metal cool against my skin, steadying me. Outside, the morning was cool but bright, and I drove with the windows cracked, letting the sharp salt breeze of Norfolk slip into the car as I passed familiar blocks of brick buildings and clipped lawns. Traffic was light for a Saturday, which was good. I didn't want excuses to turn around, even though I could hear my father's voice every mile I passed, telling me to stay in my lane, to remember where I stood. At the base, the parking lot was already half full, a small wave of blue uniforms and dark suits moving toward the hall entrance. I parked, checked my reflection in the rear view, and stepped out, smoothing down the front of my blazer before walking toward the doors. I paused, took a breath, and reminded myself, you will see me. Inside, the hall was already buzzing, the low murmur of conversations layered under the rustle of programs and the faint squeak of polished shoes on the tiled floor. I spotted Mom first, fussing with the collar of Harlan's uniform as he stood, arms slightly away from his sides, letting her adjust him like he was still 12. Dad stood a step behind them, scanning the room like he was on watch, eyes flicking from person to person, pausing on each uniform to read the rank, the ribbons. Mom's face lit up when she saw me, but the light shifted quickly, redirected back to Harlan as she smoothed his shoulder and said something that made him laugh. Dad nodded at me, tight-lipped, before he glanced away, already checking who else had arrived, probably looking for someone worth impressing. A young ensign walked up to me, asking if I was here for the ceremony, his voice polite, but already moving to the next question in his head. I nodded, and he gestured toward the rows of chairs, leading me to a seat near the back, close to the exit, right next to the hallway for the restrooms. I opened my mouth, then closed it, forcing a polite smile as I sat, the faint smell of industrial cleaner from the restroom drifting in every time the door swung open. In front of me, rows of heads, neat haircuts, and carefully styled buns moved as people shifted, laughing softly or checking their phones. I clutched mine in my hand, staring at the dark screen, feeling the weight of it, the urge to scroll, to distract myself, to look like I wasn't alone in a room full of people who didn't even know who I was. The national anthem began, and I stood, straightening my back, letting my eyes close for a moment as the music filled the room. I could almost smell the stale coffee from the surveillance van, feel the stiffness in my neck from hours of watching, waiting, deciding whether to make a call that could end a life or save it. I remembered the cold dawns, the long debriefings, the nights I spent writing reports that would get cut down to a single sentence in someone else's briefing file. As the music faded, the program began, voices rising and falling as they listed Harlan's achievements, his training, his assignments, each point marked by small nods and soft applause. They spoke about family, about the support that made him who he was, listing Mom, Dad, uncles who had served, neighbors who watched him grow. My name wasn't there. I felt the flush creep up my neck, heat rising as the whisper from the row in front of me cut through the quiet. "I thought she was an admin or something." The words dropped like a stone, but I kept my face still, my eyes fixed on the back of the head in front of me, refusing to blink. I wanted to stand, to correct them, to list every operation, every mission, every moment I stood between danger and safety, for people who would never know my name. But I stayed seated, my hands tight around my phone, pressing it so hard I could feel the edges digging into my palms, a small, sharp pain that kept me from sinking. They finished the introductions, and Harlan stepped forward, his smile bright, confident, everything Dad ever wanted in a son. He turned toward the audience, shaking hands, his uniform sharp under the lights, medals catching the glow, making him look like a figure from a recruitment poster. I looked down at my bracelet, hidden under my sleeve, the cool weight of it reminding me of who I was, of every choice I made that brought me here, even if no one else would see it. I took a breath, letting it out slowly, my shoulders dropping as I whispered to myself, so softly that only I could hear, "They will know who I am." But first, I needed to remember who I was. When I got home that evening, I didn't bother turning on the overhead light. The soft glow of the lamp near the couch was enough as I slipped off my shoes, the wet soles squeaking against the old wood floor. I hung my damp blazer on the back of a chair, letting the rainwater drip into the mat below. The quiet of the apartment wrapped around me, different from the sterile, bright noise of the ceremony hall, different from Dad's clipped comments or Mom's busy praises aimed elsewhere. I stood by the window, looking out at the drizzle falling over the streetlights, the water pooling in the cracks of the pavement. The reflection looking back at me was tired, older around the eyes, hair already slipping from the tight bun I'd forced it into that morning. For a moment, I could almost hear the echo of that hall, the whispers, the introductions that skipped over me as if I wasn't even standing there. I let my hand touch the glass, cool and steady, and closed my eyes, letting the sting behind them settle without letting tears fall. I moved to the couch, sinking into the cushion, and let the room hold me as I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding all day. The quiet was thick, only broken by the gentle hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock on the wall. My eyes drifted to the boxes stacked in the corner, files from old cases, evidence photos, small trinkets from the field, reminders of the life I had built before everyone decided to forget it existed. I reached for the bracelet under my sleeve, feeling the grooves in the metal, the small imperfections that made it mine. My mind drifted, uninvited, to the memory I had spent years trying to bury. I was 29 then, a field agent, coming home late with a file tucked under my arm, another operation, another night I had spent outside a suspect's house, eating stale vending machine snacks, watching shadows in windows, waiting for a signal. The hallway smelled like Mom's cooking, and the light from the kitchen spilled into the dark, drawing me closer. I heard Dad's voice before I saw him, low and careful, the way he spoke when he didn't want to be overheard. "Don't end up like your sister, Harlan. She can't handle the real stuff." I stood there, frozen, the mission file pressing into my ribs, my breath caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. I remember the way my knuckles turned white around that file, the edge of it digging into my palm until it left a crease that took hours to fade. I never asked him about it. I just carried it with me, letting it harden into something quiet inside, something that still burned. The sharp vibration of my phone in the dark room broke that memory, pulling me back. I blinked, cleared my throat, and picked it up. A message from Harlan. "Yeah, she showed up. Always acting like she's something big. Dad's right, she couldn't hack it." The screen glowed in my hand, bright against the shadows, the words sharp and careless, like a slap I didn't see coming. My thumb hovered over the screen, the urge to call him, to demand an explanation, to scream, boiling under the calm I forced on my face. But I didn't call. I just let the phone drop onto the cushion beside me, the message still open, still there, undeniable. I let my head fall back against the couch, eyes closing, the room spinning around the edges as the words repeated themselves, over and over, matching the dull ache in my chest. Couldn't hack it. I didn't cry. Instead, my jaw locked, my teeth pressed together, and my hands began to tremble, the kind of tremble that comes when you're holding yourself back from something. Words, action, collapse. My eyes flicked to the boxes again, to the files with my name on the cover, to the commendations shoved into folders, to the small victories no one in that family wanted to see. I slid down, sitting on the floor, knees pulled up, the bracelet clutched tightly in my palm as I pressed it to my forehead. The coolness of it was grounding, the reminder of the girl I was when Mom gave it to me, the promise I made to myself to never let anyone tell me who I was meant to be. "You are not small." I whispered it, first to the room, then again, softer, to myself, like a promise, like a prayer. I pushed myself up, legs unsteady for a moment, and walked to the small desk in the corner where my FBI-issued laptop sat. I flipped it open, the screen lighting up, the familiar glow cutting through the darkness. My fingers moved without thinking, pulling up folders, files, reports with my name on them. Operation summaries where my work had saved lives, where my analysis had prevented bombings, where my long nights had cracked codes and led to arrests. I let the screen light my face as I opened an old video, one I hadn't watched in years. Me, sitting in front of a congressional subcommittee, explaining encryption methods, counterterrorism procedures, answering every question with a steady voice, clear and calm, the kind of voice that had once made me believe I could change things. I watched her, that woman in the video, and felt the steel returning to my spine, the resolve slipping back into place like it had never left. They didn't know who I was, but I did. I closed the laptop softly, the click final in the quiet room, and stood, walking to the mirror by the door. My reflection stared back, eyes tired but alive, lips pressed into a line of quiet determination. They don't have to see me, but they will. I just didn't expect the first to see me would be the one I least expected. Sunday drifted in with a gray sky and a steady drizzle tapping against my window, pulling me out of bed earlier than I wanted. I made coffee and sat by the small kitchen table, the steam rising, warming my fingers as I checked my phone, seeing no messages from Harlan, not that I expected any. By noon, I had pulled on jeans and a soft sweater, tying my hair back, letting the simplicity of it be my armor for what was ahead. The drive to my parents' place was quiet, streets damp and empty, the world slow under the weight of a cold Virginia afternoon. I pulled into their driveway, engine idling for a second, while I took a breath, pressing my thumb against the bracelet on my wrist before shutting off the ignition. Mom opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and warm laundry. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice trembling before she pulled back, smoothing her apron, slipping back into the role she had always played. I followed her in, wiping my shoes on the mat, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting me like a ghost. They were all in the living room, plates of quiche and fruit lined up on the counter, mimosas in cheap plastic cups that Dad insisted on for easy cleanup. Harlan was in the center, wearing a crisp shirt, hair perfect, laughing at something Dad had said. A few family friends I barely recognized were there too, all smiles, clapping him on the back, saying, "We're so proud," and "You're making us all look good." I stood for a moment, watching them before Mom pressed a cup into my hand, guiding me toward a seat near the window. I sat, legs crossed, letting the warmth of the cup seep into my palms, the chatter around me a dull hum. Dad's voice, however, always cut through, even when he wasn't trying. "Not everyone is built to lead in the real world, but some of us are," he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, tipping his glass toward Harlan. A few people chuckled, the kind of laugh people give when they don't know what else to do, and Harlan smirked, eyes flicking to me before looking away. My grip tightened on the cup, knuckles whitening, but I kept my face calm, letting the moment pass over me like cold water. I sipped slowly, feeling the bubbles sting my tongue, watching the way Dad looked at Harlan with pride, the way Harlan stood a little taller under it. After a while, I stood, offering to help Mom clear the plates. She smiled, grateful, and together we gathered the cups and dishes, the clatter of ceramic filling the silence between us as the laughter continued in the living room. I was at the sink, rinsing plates, the water warm on my hands, when I felt the shift in the air before I heard his steps behind me. Dad's reflection appeared in the window over the sink, arms folded, mouth a tight line. "I don't know why you keep coming to these things, Malis. Looking for validation?" His voice was low, almost casual, but I heard the bite in it, the accusation he didn't bother to hide. I turned, drying my hands on a towel, meeting his eyes with a calm I had to pull from somewhere deep. "I'm not here for your validation, Dad." His jaw moved, the muscle ticking, eyes narrowing. "You walked away from the field," he said, like it was the final argument, like it was all he needed to remind me of who I was in his eyes. I held his gaze, steady, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "No. I walked into a position that protects more people than you'll ever know." My voice didn't rise, didn't shake, and for a second I saw something flicker in his eyes, something he quickly buried under the same disappointment he always wore when he looked at me. We stood there, the water still running behind me, the only sound in the space between us, before he huffed, turning away, muttering, "You think you know everything?" under his breath as he walked back to the living room. I turned off the water, drying my hands slowly, letting the heat of the moment drain, leaving only a cold resolve in its place. I glanced at Mom, who was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, worry etched across her face. This time, I didn't look away. I held her gaze until she looked down, busying herself with folding a napkin she didn't need to fold. Carrying the last of the dishes, I stepped back into the living room, setting them down before taking my seat again. The conversations resumed, but the laughter was a little thinner now, the glances toward me sharper, curious. I didn't shrink this time. I crossed my legs, leaned back, letting them feel my presence, letting them see that I wasn't leaving, not this time. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket, and I pulled it out, screen lighting up with a message draft I had left open earlier. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I started typing, the words coming easily now. I'm ready for the next step. I hit send, the message flying to Nadine Bloom, the woman who had mentored me, the woman who saw me long before I knew how to see myself. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight of it grounding, reminding me that I didn't need the room's approval, that I didn't need to shrink to keep the peace anymore. The rain outside had stopped, the clouds breaking just enough for a soft light to fill the room, casting gentle shadows across the walls as I looked around, letting the warmth of the moment settle. The next step came faster than I expected. I woke up before dawn, the faint glow from the streetlights cutting lines across my bedroom wall. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, and I reached for it, the screen lighting up with Nadine's name. "We need you in DC today. Something's come up," was all she said before hanging up. I didn't linger. I dressed in dark slacks, a pressed blouse, hair tied back into a clean bun, the bracelet on my wrist hidden beneath my sleeve. As I drove up I-95, the gray morning opened into a pale blue, my mind quiet except for the steady reminder in my chest that I had promised myself I wouldn't shrink back again. The FBI field office in DC hadn't changed much since the last time I was there. Its clean lines and secure glass doors reminding me of the endless days and nights spent here, poring over case files, piecing together threats before they turned into headlines. I parked, grabbed my badge from the console and walked toward the entrance, scanning the sidewalk, noticing the coffee vendors, the hurried agents brushing past. Inside, the scent of coffee and toner hit me, and a few familiar faces nodded as I passed, though most kept walking, eyes down, focused on their own fires to put out. It felt like slipping into an old coat, familiar, a little heavy, but mine. Nadine was waiting by the elevators, arms crossed, her dark eyes assessing as always. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, just tilted her head toward the upper floors. "We'll talk in your old office," she said, walking ahead, her heels tapping against the tile. My office, or what used to be mine, was smaller than I remembered, cluttered with folders stacked in neat chaos, monitors glowing softly with encrypted files. A mug still sat on the corner of the desk, the one that said, "Stay sharp." I picked it up, thumb brushing over the words before setting it back down. Nadine closed the door, dropping a thick file onto the desk between us. "We have a problem," she said, her voice calm, but the tightness around her mouth giving her away. I opened the file, photos clipped to printed pages. The header from a conspiracy blog I'd never heard of screaming in bold letters, "FBI cover-up, the director who couldn't lead." I felt my stomach tighten, my eyes scanning the paragraphs that twisted fragments of truth into a narrative meant to wound. They claimed I had left the field after a botched operation, implying cowardice, incompetence. My hands felt cold as I flipped the pages, seeing references to old operations, locations only a handful of people would have known. "They're trying to paint you as someone who cracked under pressure," Nadine said, her voice low. I closed the file, taking a breath that didn't quite settle in my lungs. "How did they get this?" I asked, though the question was more to the room than to her. Nadine hesitated, then pulled up her tablet, showing me an email forwarded to senior staff. "This came in yesterday," she said, turning the screen so I could read. "Your so-called hero director couldn't even protect her own team. Don't trust her." The words were simple enough, but what made my pulse quicken was the sentence that followed. "A leader who can't lead in chaos isn't a leader at all." I had heard those exact words before, years ago, hissed under my father's breath during a dinner when I came home bruised and exhausted after a mission that hadn't gone as planned. I clenched my jaw, the room narrowing for a moment as the memory pushed against the present. "I don't know who sent it yet," Nadine continued, studying me. "But we're running traces. Whoever it is, they're trying to undermine you." I nodded, setting the tablet down, my reflection in its dark screen showing the flicker of anger I was trying to hold steady. "Give me everything we have on the leak. I want to see who's been accessing these files, who's been talking." Nadine raised an eyebrow. "You're too close to this, Melis." I met her eyes, letting her see there was no wavering in me now. "I'm the only one who understands the layers here. Whoever is doing this knows me, knows how to hit where it hurts. Family or not, I'm going to find them." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded, sliding a folder across the desk. "We've opened a counter-investigation. You'll lead it." I took the folder, flipping it open, scanning names, dates, access logs, the beginnings of a trail that would lead to whoever decided to come after me from the shadows. The hum of the office outside the door felt distant as I focused, the walls of the room fading until it was just me, the data, and the promise I had made to myself. I stood, tucking the folder under my arm, glancing once more at the "Stay Sharp" mug before walking toward the door. Nadine followed, her hand on my shoulder for a brief second before she pulled away. "Don't let this take you down, Melis," she said. I turned to her, a small, determined smile tugging at my lips. "Not today." As I left the office, walking down the hall toward the elevator, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, the screen lighting up with the reflection of my determined face. I typed a message quickly before stepping into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft thud. I was going to find them. But they found me first. Tuesday rolled in with heavy clouds pushing against the morning, the kind of sky that promises rain that will linger, seeping into every crack. I parked near the FBI building, the tires crunching over gravel, the rhythm of wipers across the windshield a steady tap against the silence in my car. I was ready to step forward, ready to clear my name, ready to move. But as I swiped my badge at the entrance, the scanner beeped red. The guard looked up, confusion on his face, then polite discomfort as he checked the monitor. "Director Ray, it looks like your access has been temporarily suspended," he said, his voice lowering, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Suspended. That word scraped across my mind, leaving a raw trail behind it. I stepped back, forcing calm into the curve of my shoulders, even as I felt every eye in the lobby on me. Inside, I waited while the staff scrambled to check on the issue, each minute stretching into the next. I stood there, arms crossed, studying the glass reflections of people avoiding eye contact, feeling the familiar chill of being talked about rather than talked to. Finally, Nadine came down herself, her steps brisk. "Come with me," she said, nodding toward the conference room down the hall. We moved through corridors lined with security glass, my reflection following alongside, eyes steady. I stepped into the room, the door clicking shut behind us. Nadine dropped a file on the table, her jaw tight. "There's been a situation," she said, pushing the file toward me. I flipped it open, my eyes catching on phrases that made my stomach turn. "Director Melis Ray implicated in potential leak. Evidence under review." The words were sharp, designed to cut, to plant doubt. "I didn't do this," I said, the calm in my voice not matching the way my pulse thundered in my ears. Nadine sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Someone planted a classified file in your credentials, making it look like you accessed it outside protocol. We're working on tracing the insertion, but Melis, this isn't a mistake. Someone is setting you up." I closed the folder, meeting her eyes. "You think this ties back to the leak from last week?" Her silence was enough of an answer. Before I could process, the door opened, and Agent Barris from Internal Affairs stepped in, his face a mask of fake sympathy. "Director Ray, for the integrity of this investigation, we recommend you take administrative leave while we sort this out. It will look better, cleaner, if you step aside willingly." I let the suggestion hang in the air for a moment, looking at his carefully neutral face, the way he avoided meeting my gaze fully. I could almost hear my father's voice in the back of my mind. A leader who can't stand in chaos isn't a leader at all. I leaned back in the chair, folding my hands calmly. If I step back now, they win, and that's not happening. Barris shifted, clearing his throat as Nadine raised an eyebrow at him, silently daring him to keep pushing. He finally nodded, stepping back out, the door closing with a soft click that felt like the first breath I'd taken in minutes. Nadine exhaled, shaking her head. "This is going to get ugly, Melis." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "Let it." It was after lunch when my phone started lighting up, notifications pinging one after another. A blog post had gone live, spreading like a brush fire across internal circles. "Director Melis Ray under investigation for breach of national security." The comments were worse than the headline, some calling for resignation, others accusing me of selling secrets, a few defending me with words like loyal, tough, and unfair. But each notification felt like another pebble thrown at a window. Relentless. I left the building late, the rain finally breaking through the clouds, splattering against the sidewalks as thunder rolled in the distance. Each step toward my car felt heavy, the weight of every word and glance settling over me like the humidity in the air. Back in my apartment, the sound of the rain against the windows was a background hum as I set down my soaked jacket, shoes squeaking on the floor. I moved to the small table near the window, sinking into the chair, elbows on my knees, hands clasped. I reached under my sleeve, touching the bracelet, letting the cold metal anchor me back into the present. My mother's voice came back to me in that moment, soft and clear. "You're stronger than you know." I straightened, inhaling, exhaling, letting the tension bleed out slowly. "You will see me, not like this, but on my terms." Grabbing my phone, I dialed Nadine, the rain drumming steadily on the glass. She answered on the second ring, her voice tired but alert. "I'm not stepping back," I said. "I didn't expect you to," she replied, the ghost of a smile in her tone. "They want a fight?" I continued, pushing myself to stand, looking out into the storm. "Let's give them one." There was a pause on the other end, a moment of shared silence, the kind that felt like an agreement without needing the words. "We're with you, Melis," she said. And that was enough. I didn't know how much I would need those words. The morning rain in D.C. had washed the streets clean, but inside me, the storm still rolled. Nadine's words the night before, "We're with you, Melis," had settled into the empty spaces between fear and anger, giving me something to stand on when everything else felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. I parked near the FBI headquarters earlier than usual, the air cool and damp as I stepped out, the buzz of the city waking around me. My badge hung around my neck again, reinstated thanks to Nadine pushing through the bureaucracy while the investigation simmered in the background. Each step toward the building felt heavier than it used to, but necessary. Inside, the hum of conversation, shoes scuffing on tile, and the scent of burned coffee in the air made everything feel achingly normal. I walked past faces that flickered between concern and avoidance, nodding politely, not slowing down. I couldn't afford to slow down. Nadine met me near the elevators, holding a cup of coffee she'd clearly grabbed for me, her eyes serious but calm. "We need to talk," she said, handing me the cup. The warmth seeped into my cold hands as we moved toward the CyberOps war room, our steps quick, controlled. Once inside, Nadine shut the door, looking at me with a focus that told me whatever was coming next was going to change everything. "Victor Dane reached out," she began, folding her arms. "He wants to meet." I blinked, the name pulling up an image of a man in uniform, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, with a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard, Harlan's commanding officer. I felt the ground shift under me, just a little. "Victor?" I repeated, caution layered over curiosity. "He says he has information that can clear your name. He's willing to meet you discreetly. There's a cafe he suggested near the river," Nadine explained, her voice steady. I let out a slow breath, letting the steam from the coffee rise between us, clouding the space. "You think we can trust him?" Nadine's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I think he's a man who doesn't waste words, and he knows the stakes." The cafe sat tucked away near the Potomac, a quiet spot that smelled like roasted beans and rain-damp concrete. The sun was low by the time I arrived, painting the water in muted gold, the air sharp with the promise of another storm. Victor was already there, seated near the window, uniform neat, posture relaxed but alert. He stood as I approached, giving a nod of respect before we both sat. "Director Ray," he greeted, voice low, calm. "Victor," I returned, matching his quiet tone. He leaned forward, fingers drumming lightly on the table before stopping, eyes locking with mine. "You're not the only one they're trying to silence." My throat tightened, but I held his gaze, waiting. Victor reached into his jacket, pulling out a small flash drive, setting it on the table between us. "You'll want to listen to this when you're alone," he said. I swallowed, letting my fingers hover over the drive before taking it, slipping it into my coat pocket. "What is it?" "Proof," he said simply, "of who's pulling the strings and why your name is the one they want tarnished." His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "You've made enemies by doing your job too well, Melis. And from what I've seen, even your family isn't above playing a part." The words didn't hit immediately. They settled, heavy and cold, sinking in slow like rain soaking into dry ground. My family, my brother, my father. "They talked about you, Melis," Victor continued, his voice measured, "like you were an inconvenience they needed to manage." I nodded once, keeping my face calm, my hands folded around the coffee cup as if it were the only thing anchoring me to the moment. We parted quietly, Victor's nod a silent promise that he would remain an ally in the shadows. I walked along the river, the sky above darkening, lights flickering on across the water. I let the tears burn behind my eyes but refused to let them fall, the anger simmering beneath the hurt like coals waiting for air. "Dad," I whispered to the wind, "you have no idea who you're dealing with." Back at my apartment, the flash drive felt like it weighed 100 pounds as I slid it into my laptop. I closed my eyes as I listened to the recording, my father's voice unmistakable, laced with disdain and arrogance. "She thinks she's bigger than the family, but one slip and we'll show her where she really belongs." The words cut deeper than I expected, but beneath the pain was something fiercer, something alive. I pulled out my phone, dialing Nadine with steady fingers, my reflection in the laptop screen staring back at me with clear, unwavering eyes. "They want to fight," I said as soon as she answered, my voice quiet but sharp. Let's give them one. We'll do this clean and legal, Nadine. I'll handle my family. You handle the agency." There was a pause, then her voice, calm and sure, came through. "This is your moment, Melis." And I was going to make sure they remembered it. It was a cool evening when I stepped out of the car, the wind carrying the salty scent from the nearby bay as I adjusted the cuff of my dark suit. The bracelet my mother gave me caught a sliver of light, a quiet reminder against my wrist as I walked toward the large auditorium at the Norfolk Naval Base. People moved around me in small clusters, voices hushed with the kind of anticipation that hangs in the air before a ceremony. Inside, flags lined the stage, their colors muted under the warm lights, the hum of conversation giving way to the occasional bark of a laugh or the creak of a chair. I scanned the room as I walked along the edge of the aisle, taking in the sea of uniforms, dignitaries, and family members packed into the rows. My eyes found Harlan first, his uniform crisp, his back straight as he chatted with an officer beside him. Corwin sat 2 seats over, leaning back in his chair, checking his watch like he was waiting for something else, something better. They didn't see me. That suited me just fine. The program began with the measured tone of the MC listing names, medals, and commendations, the rhythm of clapping breaking up the speeches as people stood, shook hands, and returned to their seats with smiles pinned in place. My heart pounded in sync with each announcement, each echo of applause ringing in my ears, but my expression stayed calm, eyes forward. I thought of the recording, the way my father's voice dripped with contempt, the way Harlan had just listened, letting him speak about me like I was a child who needed to be taught her place. The years of small cuts came back in flashes, the dinner table slights, the silences, the way I'd been treated like a shadow trailing behind the men in my family. I was done being a shadow. When Victor Dane took the stage, the room settled, the quiet respect people gave him filling every corner as he began to speak about duty and the power of collaboration across agencies. I felt the air change, the subtle shift that happens before a storm breaks. Victor paused, letting the silence stretch as his eyes moved across the audience. "And today," he continued, "we honor Director Melis Ray of the FBI, whose leadership was instrumental in dismantling a network that threatened our national security." His eyes found mine, and in front of everyone, Victor Dane raised his hand and saluted. It was like the air got sucked out of the room for a moment, replaced by a stunned quiet that made every detail sharper. Harlan's head snapped up, his eyes searching the crowd until they landed on me. Corwin went pale, his jaw tightening as if he could swallow the moment back into silence. I stood, the bracelet cool against my skin as I walked down the aisle, my shoes tapped against the polished floor, each step steady, unhurried, as I moved past faces turning to follow me, whispers stirring in my wake. I reached the stage, taking Victor's hand as he lowered his salute, his eyes steady, acknowledging me without words. Applause started, hesitant at first, then spreading as people clapped, some rising to their feet. I didn't let my eyes drift toward Harlan or Corwin. This was mine. When the ceremony ended, the room broke into smaller conversations, people gathering to offer congratulations, to shake hands, to smile for photos. I stepped aside, letting the crowd move past me, letting the moment settle in. I saw them in the hallway, near the exit. Harlan's shoulders were rigid, his eyes shifting toward me before darting away. Corwin's face was flushed, his mouth opening as if he had words ready, words to spin, to excuse, to erase. "Melis, I raised my hand, palm out, stopping him before he could continue. "You don't get to rewrite who I am anymore," I said, my voice calm, each word a boundary he couldn't cross. Harlan looked down, the weight of the moment pressing on him in a way that no lecture, no scolding could have managed. For once, the silence was theirs to carry, not mine. I stepped past them, the air outside sharp with the promise of rain, the sounds of the ocean soft in the background as I walked toward my car. The night felt alive around me, each breath tasting of salt and new beginnings. I looked down at the bracelet, the light catching on the metal, remembering my mother's quiet strength, the way she had always seen me even when others refused to. "You see me now," I whispered, a promise to myself, to the world, to the girl I had been, and the woman I had become. But seeing isn't the same as understanding. The clouds were hanging low, pressing down on the quiet Sunday morning as I parked in front of the house where I had spent so many years waiting to be seen. I sat for a moment, fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel, the envelope on the passenger seat like a weight that wouldn't let me breathe until I carried it inside. I stepped out, gravel crunching under my shoes as I made my way to the porch, pausing before I knocked. The door opened before I could, and there was my mother, her eyes softer than I remembered, pulling me into a quiet hug that smelled like coffee and the lavender lotion she always used. She held on longer than usual, pulling away just enough to look at me, her hand brushing a stray hair from my face before she stepped aside to let me in. The house felt smaller now, or maybe it was me that felt larger, no longer shrinking to fit into the corners they had pushed me into. Corwin sat at the kitchen table staring into his coffee, tapping a finger against the mug in a rhythm that I knew meant he was nervous, though he'd never admit it. Harlan stood by the window, arms crossed, pretending to watch the street, pretending not to be waiting for me. I set the envelope down on the counter, letting it sit there between us like a line drawn in sand. Corwin cleared his throat, his voice tight, trying to find the words that would make him the reasonable father again. "We just wanted what was best for you," I said, my voice calm, but each word sharp enough to cut through the excuses. "Not me." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, each second stretching longer than the last. Harlan shifted by the window, finally turning to face me, his eyes red-rimmed, not from tears, but from the exhaustion of pretending he hadn't been part of it. "I didn't know it would go that far," he whispered, and for the first time I heard fear in his voice. "You never asked," I replied, feeling tears build behind my eyes but refusing to let them fall. I wasn't here for pity. I wasn't here for their apologies, half-baked and laced with conditions. I was here because it was time they understood what they had done. Corwin opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand, stopping him. His jaw clenched, the way it always did when he wanted to yell but knew it wouldn't help him now. His eyes were glassy, and for a moment, I saw the father who used to lift me onto his shoulders when I was little, before I became too much, before I became something he didn't know how to handle. I pushed the envelope closer to him. "Inside is a copy of the commendation I received, the one you pretended not to see, the one you thought you could erase with your silence." He didn't reach for it, neither did Harlan. "I don't need you to be proud of me," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "I need you to respect me." I turned, letting the silence sit with them, letting the weight of what I said press down the way it had pressed down on me for years. I took one last look around the kitchen, the place where I had learned to keep quiet, to keep my head down, to make myself small so that they wouldn't be uncomfortable with the size of my dreams. Isolde followed me to the door, her hand squeezing mine as she whispered, "You always deserved better." Her eyes were wet, and for the first time, I let her see that mine were too. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. I opened my car door, the bracelet glinting against my wrist as I glanced back at the house. It looked the same, but it would never feel the same again. As I drove away, the tires humming against the wet pavement, I let the memories come. The little girl waiting for her father's praise, the teenager trying to make herself small enough to fit into the spaces they left for her, the young woman fighting for every inch of recognition in a world that thought it knew better than she did. I was never lost, I whispered to myself, the words tasting like freedom as I merged onto the highway, the road opening up before me, each mile a promise. I was just never seen.